All right, let's dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad. This is going to be fun. We've got some great excerpts from you all, and it looks like you're really interested in the whole two dads thing, you know?
Yeah, that's such a powerful framework, isn't it? The rich dad versus poor dad thing.
Absolutely. And like how those two different perspectives, how they play out in Robert Kiyosaki's life and like the lessons he learned.
Right, because you've got the poor dad, his actual father, who's like this highly educated guy, school teacher,
Mm,
believes in working hard, getting a good education, all that. But
yeah.
then you've got the rich dad, who's like this self-made entrepreneur, totally different mindset.
And Kiyosaki's point is that those early influences, like what you learn about money at home, that stuff can stick with you.
Totally. Like more than what you even learned in school, right?
Exactly. It really shapes your whole money blueprint, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I think those early stories, like the one with the toothpaste tubes, that really brings it to life.
Oh, yeah. 9-year-old Robert and his friend Mike collecting those used tubes, trying to get the lead out. I mean,
It's crazy.
like, talk about an entrepreneurial spirit, even if it was a little,
Misguided.
yeah, and maybe not the most legal business venture.
But the thing is, it's how Rich Dad reacts to it.
Yeah.
Right? That's the lesson. He doesn't freak out. He actually kind of praises them.
He sees the hustle.
Exactly. The initiative, the drive, like even if the idea was totally flawed,
Yeah.
they were thinking outside the box.
That's so important. I think a lot of people, they get discouraged by failure. But Rich Dad is like, hey, you tried something, you took action.
Right. It's that whole learn from your mistakes thing.
Big time. And speaking of learning from your mistakes, there's that whole story of Robert working for Rich Dad for like 10 cents an hour.
Oh, man. That's got to be a tough one to swallow.
Right. I mean, it seems almost exploitative at first.
But that was the point, right? To push those buttons.
It was a deliberate lesson.
Like Rich Dad wanted him to confront that fear of being poor, of being stuck in a job just for the paycheck.
So it wasn't really about the actual work, it was about that mindset shift.
Exactly. Getting him out of his comfort zone, forcing him to think differently.
That's a powerful message, man. Sometimes you got to get uncomfortable to grow.
And that leads right into one of the core lessons of the book, right?
Yeah.
The whole assets versus liabilities thing.
This is huge, right? It's like the foundation of Kiyosaki's whole philosophy.
Totally. And it seems so simple, but it's really profound when you think about it. Assets put money in your pocket. Liabilities take money out.
I love how he uses those simple diagrams in the book, to show the flow of cash.
Yeah, it makes it so clear.
It's like suddenly you see how building up your asset column is the key.
And Rich Dad argues that most people, they focus on increasing their income, their job, their whatever, and they don't focus on building assets.
So it's not just about earning more, it's about what you do with what you earn.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so give us some examples here. What are some common assets versus liabilities? What are we talking about?
Okay, so an asset, let's say, like rental property, right? It's generating income.
Hmm.
Or stocks that pay dividends. Or maybe you own a business and it's profitable. That's an asset.
Okay, that makes sense. And on the flip side, liabilities are,
Think about, I don't know, like a fancy car you bought on credit. Or like all those vacations you put on your credit card.
oh yeah,
That's money going out every month. Or even a big house, with a giant mortgage. If it's not generating income, that can be a liability too.
that's interesting.
It's a different way of thinking about like spending and consumption.
Totally. Like we're always told to reward ourselves with stuff, but maybe that's not always the best strategy.
Right, right. It's like, are you really rewarding yourself or are you just digging yourself deeper into debt?
Okay, so then how do we shift that? How do we get out of that mindset?
Well, that's where Rich Dad's famous mantra comes in, right? Mind your own
Yeah.
business.
I have a feeling this is about more than just starting a company.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's about building your asset column, not just focusing on your job or your paycheck. It's about taking control of your financial future.
So even if you have a job, even if you're making good money, it's about building that side hustle, that passive income.
Exactly. Because a job, it gives you income,
Yeah.
but it doesn't necessarily create lasting wealth or security.
Right, right. And then there's the story of Kim, Robert's wife, who buys her Mercedes.
Yeah, she doesn't buy it with a loan or anything. She literally buys it with the income from her assets.
That's amazing. She made her assets pay for her luxury.
Exactly. It's like she played the long game. She built that solid foundation.
And it proves that it can be done, right? You can create a life where your money works for you.
That's the whole point of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? It's about changing your mindset, changing your approach to money.
And it's not just about the practical stuff like investing and all that. It's also about those mental barriers.
Oh, yeah, like overcoming fear and all that.
Exactly. And that's something we're going to dive into in the next part of our deep dive. So stay tuned. One of the things that really struck me about Rich Dad, Poor Dad is how Kiyosaki talks about fear. Like it's not always a bad thing.
It's almost like he sees it as a motivator, right?
Totally. Instead of letting it paralyze you, he's like, use it. Use it to fuel your actions.
Yeah, he even uses that analogy. Remember the Alamo? Like how losers are defeated by fear, but winners, they're inspired by it.
It's such a powerful image, right? Like flipping the script on how we usually think about failure.
And he gives some real-life examples, too, like that story about his friend who missed out on a killer real estate deal just because he was too afraid to take the risk.
Oh, yeah. That one was a gut punch. Like sometimes playing it safe can be just as risky as, taking a chance.
Exactly. Sometimes that fear of losing, it actually keeps us from winning.
And it's not just fear, right? There's cynicism too. Like that voice that says, it's too good to be true, or this will never work.
Kiyosaki calls those people poor investors, right? He wants us to be sophisticated investors.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we become more sophisticated?
He says, don't just accept what others are saying. Do your own research. Analyze the deals. Make informed decisions.
So become your own financial detective.
Right. Look for those opportunities that other people might miss because they're too caught up in their doubts.
And sometimes those opportunities come when things are a little shaky, when the economy is a little uncertain.
Yeah, he even says, buy when there's blood in the streets, which sounds kind of intense, but
He means it metaphorically.
Right.
Go for it. But the point is, you got to have the courage to see the potential when everyone else is panicking.
exactly.
But courage and a positive attitude, those aren't always enough, are they? Sometimes we get stuck in that procrastination mode. We know what we should do, but we just can't seem to get ourselves to do it.
Oh, yeah, we all struggle with that.
So what's Kiyosaki's solution for laziness?
Well, he's got a pretty unconventional answer. A little bit of greed.
Hold on, greed. Isn't that like a bad thing?
It can be, but he's talking about that healthy desire, that yearning for a better life.
Okay, so it's about harnessing that energy, that I want energy, and using it to fuel your action.
Exactly. Ask yourself, what's in it for me? Like, what would my life look like if I achieve these goals?
It's like paint that picture of your ideal future and then let that pull you forward.
Yeah, and once you have that vision, then it's about developing those positive financial habits, right? Like paying yourself first.
That's a big one. I used to think that was just about setting aside money for savings.
It's way more than that. It's about prioritizing your financial well-being above everything else, even your bills.
Whoa, really?
Kiyosaki says, pay yourself first, then worry about the rest.
So like allocate a portion of your income to your asset column before you pay anything else.
Exactly.
That's kind of intense.
It might feel a little uncomfortable at first, but that pressure, it can actually be a good thing. It can push you to find creative ways to increase your income or build your assets more aggressively.
So it's like turning up the heat on your financial creativity?
Right. Because if you always wait till the end of the month to see what's left over, chances are there won't be much.
And that brings us to investing, right? Which can feel overwhelming for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. And Kiyosaki is a big believer in getting expert advice. He says, pay professionals well, especially the ones who have a proven track record.
Which makes sense, right? If you're serious about building wealth, learn from the best.
Exactly. He says, find people who are already successful in the areas you want to master. Look at their results.
So it's not just about getting a few tips here and there. It's about finding those mentors, those guides.
Right. Build those long-term relationships with people who can help you make smarter decisions.
Okay, that makes sense. But even with the best advice, we all make mistakes, right? Especially when it comes to investing.
Totally. And Kiyosaki emphasizes that. He says, don't be afraid to look foolish. Don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Because even the most successful investors, they've had their share of losses, right?
Absolutely. He reminds us that financial success, it's a journey, not a destination.
And it's about learning from those mistakes and becoming a better investor because of them.
Right. Don't let the fear of failure hold you back.
Okay, so we've talked about fear, cynicism, laziness, those mental barriers. But then there's the whole thing about corporations, which is where things get a little,
Controversial.
yeah, like he's really challenging the status quo here.
He's basically saying, look, the wealthy, they use corporations to their advantage, and you can too.
He uses that whole Robin Hood analogy, right?
Yeah. Like the idea of taking from the rich has actually led to higher taxes on the middle class.
It's like the rich have figured out how to play the game and the rest of us are kind of left behind.
He wants us to level the playing field.
So it's not about being anti-rich or anything. It's about understanding how the system works and using it to your advantage.
Exactly.
Hmm.
He wants us to learn the rules of the game, to understand how to use corporations and other legal structures to protect our assets.
It's definitely a different way of thinking about things, but it's also empowering, you know?
Totally. It's about taking control of your financial future.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Fear, cynicism, laziness, the power of corporations, and so much more.
And in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some of the more um, personal aspects of Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Like finding your reason why, those deeper motivations.
Exactly. And the importance of giving back. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And, we've talked about a lot of practical strategies, but now I want to get into some of the, I don't know, maybe deeper, more like philosophical stuff in the book.
Yeah, like the mindset piece, right?
Exactly. Like Kiyosaki talks about this idea of finding your reason why, which sounds kind of touchy-feely, but
No, it's huge. It's like, what's your driving force? What's that deeper motivation that's going to keep you going when things get tough?
he talks about needing a reason that's like bigger than just wanting a bigger house or a fancy car.
Right. It's got to be something more meaningful, something that really speaks to your soul.
He uses that example of wanting to escape the rat race, right? That feeling of being trapped.
Yeah, that was his big why.
Ah.
He wanted a different life, a life where he wasn't just working to pay bills.
So it's about figuring out what truly matters to you. Like, what do you want your life to be about?
And then letting that guide your financial decisions. Because when you have that strong why, it makes it easier to make sacrifices, to stay focused on your goals.
That makes sense. And I guess that ties into finding mentors too, right? Like surrounding yourself with people who have already achieved what you want.
Oh, absolutely. Kiyosaki talks a lot about the importance of learning from those who are already successful.
It's like having a shortcut almost. Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, you can learn from their mistakes, their successes.
And he says, be a good student. Be open to new ideas. Be willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Because sometimes our biggest limitations are the ones we put on ourselves.
Totally. And that leads into another key concept, right? Mastering formulas for making money.
Okay, so this is where it gets a little more tactical.
Kind of. But it's still about mindset, too. Because Kiyosaki believes that financial success isn't just about luck, it's about understanding the principles and strategies that create wealth.
So it's like there are formulas, there are recipes for success.
Yeah. Whether it's real estate or stocks or building a business, there are proven principles that can help you.
It's like having the cheat codes for the game of finance.
Exactly. But it still takes work. You got to study those formulas. You got to learn how to apply them.
And that's where continuous learning comes in, right?
Oh, absolutely. The world of finance is constantly changing. You got to stay adaptable, stay curious.
And that means being willing to make mistakes too.
He talks about that a lot, actually. Like, even the best investors, they've all made mistakes. It's part of the process.
The key is to learn from those mistakes, right?
Exactly. Don't let the fear of failure hold you back from trying new things.
Okay, so we've talked about finding your why, finding mentors, mastering formulas, overcoming fear. Is there anything else we should touch on before we wrap up?
Well, can't forget about the power of giving. That's a big one for Kiyosaki.
This is where he gets really unconventional, right? Like
Oh.
the idea that the more you give, the more you receive.
He's a big believer in that principle of reciprocity. And he says it's not just about money, it's about giving your time, your knowledge, your resources.
It's about contributing to the world, making a difference.
Exactly. And he says even when you're feeling financially strapped, giving what you can, even if it's a small amount, it can actually attract more abundance into your life.
So it's about shifting from a mindset of scarcity to abundance.
Right. Trusting that there's always enough to go around.
This has been an amazing exploration of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So much to think about, so much to learn.
It's one of those books that really makes you question your assumptions and rethink your whole approach to money.
And it ultimately empowers you to take control of your financial future.
Yeah, and create a life of freedom and abundance.
So to all of you listening, remember, the most powerful asset you have is your mind.
Use it wisely
Invest in yourself.
and never stop learning and growing.